Today on Political Business, we take a look at this main story of the day, the latest from Peter Mandelson and the Epstein files.
And on the ground from the Gorton and Denton by-election, we give you the latest on what's happening there.
And then on policy issues, we look at the proposed overnight levy. More on that later.
So, Kevin, another eventful week in Labour politics. Peter Mandelson back in the news again. Lots has been talked about in relation to what has come out about Peter Mandelson in the last week or so. But look, tell us from your perspective, what's happened? How is this going down in Labour circles? And crucially, what does it actually mean for the government?
Well, I'd question the framing there. It is not a Labour issue. Peter Mandelson is no longer a member of the Labour Party, and indeed disciplinary action have been started against him, according to Darren Jones in the Commons chamber yesterday. More of that in a minute. Look, I think the only person that's probably delighted by the news yesterday, and we'll go through it, of Peter Mandelson's activities whilst in the cabinet under the last government would be the prince formerly known as Andrew. What would it take to knock Andrew off the front pages with Epstein? Well, here we got it. Basically, the suggestion, not any wrongdoing around the sexual proclivities and illegalities of Jeffrey Epstein, but it now clear through a cache of emails released under duress under an act of Congress by the US Justice Department, that Peter Mandelson was passing on what's essentially market-sensitive information directly from Cabinet, whilst in 2009-10, when he was Business Secretary in the Gordon Brown administration, and passing it directly to Jeffrey Epstein, who then presumably was either passing it on to other Wall Street contacts or monetizing it himself. Just some of the top line ones as emails direct from Gordon Brown and from Treasury officials and the famous Shriti Vadera, talking about changes to the mortgage market, pre-brief on the Euro bailout, all of which was passed on to Jeffrey Epstein, in some cases within seconds. There's the sale of British state assets in order to try and maintain a potential 2010 general election commitment not to increase corporation tax or income tax. That was forwarded within 3 seconds to Jeffrey Epstein. So that's how serious it is. It's potentially corruption. The story's moving quickly. It started with information leaking from the cabinet, and by the end of the day, became Metropolitan Police confirmed that they were investigating potential misconduct in public office. Pretty significant. So that's all historic. So what does it mean today? Well, there's a bridge here. And the principal new actor in the what happens to Keir Starmer and Number 10 saga is Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister. Not only did he come out yesterday and issue a statement saying he was shocked and there should be an investigation into Peter Mandelson's activity, he then said he had raised this with the Cabinet Secretary in September last year, which means several characters, including Number 10, knew about concerns from Gordon Brown before Number 10 pushed, and Warden McSweeney in particular, the Chief of Staff, pushed Peter Mandelson's appointment to the ambassador position. So Gordon Brown has raised it previously, so clearly it's not news to him. I think Gordon's view is that the extent is surprising, but not the actuality of leaks from the cabinet. So I think there's major moves within the parliamentary party to have Peter Mandelson's peerage removed. That's quite difficult in terms of process. Keir and Darren Jones, speaking from the chamber yesterday, basically kicked the can down the road and said there should be cross-party moves in the Lords to enhance disciplinary procedures. So they've made no commitment to remove Peter Mandelson anytime soon. But this is a fast-developing story. Number 10 is, it's fair to say, on the ropes here. Members of the PLP again have zeroed in on Number 10's judgement. And what did they know when this isn't going to go away for Keir Starmer? It was being rumoured last night that the fall guy for all this, to protect the Prime Minister, would in fact be Morgan McSweeney, who potentially, according to some, was being lined up for after May to pursue new opportunities and spend more time with his family, but one of whom, of course, is in the House of Commons, thanks to him. But actually, that may even be accelerated. So this is a fast-moving story. It's clear what happened in 2009-10 is relevant in 2026, the current incumbent of Downing Street. Some are calling it the revenge of the Brownites. Others are saying, I quoted Peter Mandelson himself, who said it's a sisterhood that's done for him. The fact is, Peter Mandelson has very few friends this morning.
All against the backdrop of the Prime Minister wanting to talk about the cost of living crisis this year and keeps getting derailed by events. And the one thing I would just say about the Mandelson piece is it's quite interesting looking back at some of the correspondence sent from BlackBerry, a reminder of the 2008, 9, 10 times when people used to use BlackBerry instead of WhatsApp, and therefore there's a record of all these messages. You do wonder now whether everyone was being held to a similar standard, the amount of disappearing messages on WhatsApp that are enabled.
Oh, well, we know that from the COVID inquiry.
Well, exactly.
That the government of the day, I'm not saying it's a left-right issue, it's a technology issue.
Mm.
And of course, in between then, of course, was government by Gmail. Which was the Tories as well. But you're right. So this is probably a moment in time. Nobody, I think, now in politics will be forwarding emails from a government email address.
Exactly. It just seems so quaint.
It does seem quite quaint, but clearly the consequences are massive. And I think, where's this going to go? Well, I think there are some people pushing for a full-on investigation, a criminal investigation, an investigation of what Number 10 knew around the appointment of Peter Mandelson. They're going to try and say they dealt with this. This will run and run. I'm told as well that there's renewed tension in Number 10 about the role of Tim Allen and what he knew, because he again has transpired that he knew about concerns around Peter Mandelson before Starmer famously went into the Commons to defend him, if you remember, in the run-up to him being sacked. So all is not well in Number 10. Somebody said to me last night, clearly Peter Mandelson will not be making a comeback. He's gone from Lazarus to Icarus.
There you go. Might finally have run out of road.
That's actually my line. I quite like that. Anyway, right.
Keep that in. But look, playing out all of this against the backdrop of a real-life election happening and a high-profile by-election, another big test for the Prime Minister. I think we were all focused very much on May being a huge electoral test. It's coming at the end of February. Since we last spoke on this podcast, we've now got the full slate of candidates standing in that by-election, with Labour very much going for the local councillor, the local candidate after the Burnham saga. Reform, I think there was chatter and a genuine debate within Reform as to whether they should choose a hyper-local candidate to be a person of the people on the ground. Instead, I think celebrity has won out, and the need for a candidate who isn't going to bumble into any media problems, potentially somebody who's a little bit more comfortable with the scrutiny that comes with the by-election. So they've selected Matt Goodwin, the commentator and academic, quite a divisive character, and that's very much a feature of Labour's campaign over there. And then, of course, Liberal Democrats, I think they've gone for another local campaigner. The Green Party has chosen a plumber and Trafford councillor as their candidate, very much, again, focusing on some of that local experience. And the Conservatives, I'm told, have chosen a detective, a Manchester detective with a 30-year career in the police, which is an interesting angle for them to go down. But
that will definitely come in handy in trying to find the Conservative vote in that part of Greater Manchester. So well done, the Tories, for going skills first.
Well, let's see how Labour get on, shall
I would
first,
say
that?
I will put money on Labour outperforming the Conservatives. I would say probably the label celebrity applied very loosely.
It may be important, that vote, to deprive other parties from a win.
We shall see. What is interesting on the ground, of course, everything kicked off over the weekend in terms of the doorstep. Reports via contacts are Reform say everything is wonderful on the doorstep. The Greens say everything is wonderful on the doorstep, and Labour say everything is wonderful on the doorstep. I think
the Conservatives aren't saying that, to be fair.
They'll use their detective skills to find the doorstep. What is interesting is actually there was a bit of a furore around a poll released at the end of last week, which had Reform in first place, Greens in second, Labour in third, but it actually didn't stand up to any scrutiny. And it was suggested actually a broader conversation around, and it was ultimately paid for by a Reform donor, about actually whether or not, as is the case in some jurisdictions, polls like this should even be allowed because they can frame the election itself. I think what I've been told by Labour sources is actually genuinely the Labour vote hasn't collapsed on the ground. And bearing in mind, look at the result that Labour got here in 2024.
Mm.
And they think they can win. They're not saying they will win, but they're not out of contention. Interestingly, Owen Jones was tweeting his anecdote. He is ferociously promoting the Greens, the zeal of the evangelist and the convert. He converted from Jeremy Corbyn, before that converted from Labour, and currently converted to the Greens. Who knows where Owen will be in the future? But he tweeted that I think it was 35. The Greens were getting 36% on the doorstep, which pollster from Ipsos Mori pointed out. If that is the feedback from the Greens themselves, that's actually terrible, because anyone who's been on the doorstep will tell you that your canvassing returns always have, confirmation bias built in. You're going to areas that are going to be more friendly to you in the first place. So Owen may have shot himself and the Greens in the foot, which does tell you something, I think, beyond Owen Jones, about a reminder about the power of the Labour by-election machine versus the Greens, which is unproven. Reforms is building. And actually, it reminded me of polling day in 2017, when I was out with lots of new members to the Labour Party, who will now be new members in the Green Party, who went out to every door, totally ignoring any data selection and data analytics built over 25 years from Britain and the US and Australia, to bang on people's doors, tell them to come out and vote for change, and how terrible the Tories were, and wouldn't you come out and support Jeremy Corbyn? And of course, everyone said yes just to get them away. And they all come back and say, everyone here is voting for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, and of course, we lost. So it's interesting. I wonder if there's a bit of that with the Greens.
Yeah.
That when you go to the doorstep and you basically tell people, how, particularly feature of the left, you basically project this huge moral superiority and disgust at the Tories or Reform, and then people just say, yeah, just go away, please. So it'd be interesting to see. Actually, the difference could also be in the by-election machines. Labour has a very effective machine in the northwest, in Greater Manchester. Andy Burnham was out on Sunday, popular guy. People stopping their cars to talk to him. He spoke to the candidate along with Lucy Powell. So Andy's putting in a shift there as well. So maybe people can Reform are trying to play that back, the Andy Burnham split, but Andy is the mayor and he is there. So we'll see what happens. Reform are making this a by-election explicitly about Keir Starmer, saying if you elect a Reform MP, then you'll Keir Starmer will have to go. Actually, Reform winning is potentially baked in. I'd argue if you elect a Green MP, that's probably the greater pressure on Keir Starmer, because that is really Labour MPs are already worried about Reform and have started to calm down a bit. They will get excited in the bed about a Green winning. So actually, I think the best message for the Greens would be send Keir Starmer a message and vote Green. But we'll see. I'll be going up late next week, of course, to hit the doorstep, and so I'll have an in-person experience. I think we call it lived experience report from Greater Manchester.
Yeah.
Speaking of lived experience,
well, I think you're right about the power of a by-election machine and the ability of established parties to get the activists in, get the right messaging, get the volume of literature down. And, Lucy Powell was out yesterday saying they'd spoken to more people in the first week than they ever have done in another by-election. So, that same infrastructure isn't going to be there for Reform, regardless of what they might say. The messaging is, and the messaging is quite tidy, I think. Make this a referendum on Keir Starmer. And Labour's messaging is also quite tidy. Unity, not division. This is about stopping Reform as much as anything else. Yeah. But it is that ground operation. Can you speak to the 2,000-3,000 voters who are going to make a difference in determining this outcome and convince them that this is a choice between Labour and Reform, not Greens and Reform?
Actually, the Labour campaign's also focusing on improvements locally. The Prime Minister is very keen that one of the three issues generally that he talks about is the cost of living, pride of place, a renewal of Britain's forgotten centres, and youth opportunity. And then actually in Manchester by-election, all of these three issues are going to be the four. Gorton High Street, in the kind of what we could call the traditional working class white bit of the constituency, has already received rather fortuitously quite a big pride of place funding announced late last year. So Labour's going hard on that and improvements to the high street and accelerating the programme. So it'll really be part of that ongoing Labour message of change promised, change delivered. We know it's hard, we're doing it here. You can't trust the Reform can't deliver that. Do you want an MP that has a voice in the government, or someone that can shout from the sidelines? All the usual kind of by-election language. But interesting that this is, there's actually a substantive policy issue here, which is representation of Labour funding, which is getting money to the front line for forgotten town centres. And that's, as I say, it's a real focus and part of the anti-reform campaign in government. And I think if that's effective, then that will be really encouraging for MPs across the country, even if, in fact, in the post-match analysis, it's not enough for Labour to win. But there'll be by-elections are great live tests of political messaging and campaign styles. So we'll see what comes out of that. I don't think it's clear yet what the Green campaign is going to be, other than vote for motherhood and apple pie. Maybe not motherhood, personhood, and apple pie. But I'm sure they will land on something that's quite effective. There are issues to do with certain elements of the community and views in the Middle East. I'm sure the Greens will press that bruise very hard. But whether or not they're able to break out from that into kind of more mainstream issues around cost of living. Student loans was a big issue this week, and I was bubbling away. It's going to be more and more prominence, and actually I think is going to be, it's on the Treasury's radar, Number 10's radar, that actually this is a huge time bomb, generational problem to do with the inequity, particularly in the Plan 2 student loans. And the Greens have identified that as, that's their demographic anyway. So it might be, we start seeing the Greens testing broader policy issues other than, Gaza nationalising water and leaving NATO.
Speaking of high streets, I am heading up to Leeds this afternoon, where some listeners may know we at Lower Kedri run an organisation called High Streets UK, which is a pro-growth partnership of the nation's flagship high streets. So everyone from Edinburgh to Cardiff, to Leeds, Liverpool, Birmingham, London, and all sorts in between. We're heading up to talk about a whole range of issues affecting the high street, and really get into the policy detail of some of the things that the government has been talking about recently. And one of those issues is the discussion and consultation that was launched at the budget about an overnight visitor levy coming in to apply to effectively Airbnbs and short-term lets alongside hotels. Look, many other countries do this. It is a charge on every overnight stay, which then gets reinvested into tourism-related activity, be that crime, public realm improvements, other things that improve high streets and flagship high streets in particular, where this charge will raise an awful lot of money. So we're heading up there to talk to the West Yorkshire Combined Authority's business advisors about how it might be implemented, how it might work in practice. And actually, I think there are a few things that the government does need to consider when rolling this out. One is, it cannot be such a high charge that it becomes cost prohibitive for people to travel to certain places. And we see how this is applied in other international destinations. It is very often a small fixed fee charge that gets directly passed on to the consumer. It doesn't really disproportionately impact the competitiveness of a location, but it does raise an awful lot of money. That's probably a sensible approach to take. There is a discussion about a larger percentage being applied, and actually for some hotels, particularly in these flagship destinations, you are then getting into hundreds and hundreds of pounds of additional charges on an overnight stay. That would be potentially quite damaging, even if the money was reinvested at a local level. So High Streets UK aims to bring together all of these flagship destinations to speak with one voice, talk to the government, talk to policymakers, metro mayors and others on the ground about how these policies can be actually implemented in a way that supports business, supports growth, regenerates high streets in a way that the government's seeking to do, but also crucially gives the government and local authorities a new revenue stream to fund improvements. Let's face it, there have been serious cost pressures applied at a local level over many years. This is one way I think the government sees of resolving that. Industry is broadly supportive, but as always with this stuff, the devil's in the details. So heading up there later today, got a conference tomorrow morning where we'll be drawing some conclusions and then relaying that information to the decision makers at government and at a local level.
I guess the question, as always, is making sure any money raised is spent for the purposes of which it is raised. Hypothecated taxes don't have a great intellectual history in the UK. It's not something we tend to do. But as you say, lots of people are familiar with going abroad and seeing a charge on their bill, whether that's in a European city break or in the US. So let's see. I know the Treasury were initially concerned that a move like this could be inflationary, but I think as the economy As the months progress, options for raising taxation to fund vital services and boost tourism and inbound investment, I guess the options are limited. So good to be part of that conversation. So what are our 3 takeaways from this week? Well, firstly, whilst the Peter Mandelson Labour story is interesting, it's going to be taking up reams and reams of column inches and broadcast minutes. The fact is the business of government does go on. So do keep in touch with your contacts, push your campaign and make sure it's business as usual as far as your outcomes and public affairs activities are focused. In due course as well, of course, government will want to be looking for good news stories to move on.
And big date for the diaries, 26th of February, the date of the Gorton and Denton by-election, a big flashpoint for the Prime Minister and the Labour leadership.
And when it comes to policy campaigns, moving as a pack has a massive impact. Build a coalition to get the outcome you want.